Hello everyone, Rich Hagan alongside Hall of Famer Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, this new thing we're trying, draft archetype blueprints. What's the goal? What are we trying to do?
We're trying to take a draft archetype and break it down into its building blocks so we can see how you would build a kind of typical version of the deck, what cards are important, and we're especially focusing on the lower rarity cards because you're going to see commons in every draft, you're going to see uncommons in almost every draft. The rares that go into each deck, it's nice when you get them, they're not critical.
And also, you're going to win a lot when you open a Glorybringer in pack 1 and in pack 2. That's kind of, we can...
Or just pack 1.
Or just pack 1, indeed. We can do that, but it is the meat and potatoes of the format where you win. And the most critical thing, you are not drafting a pile of cards, you are drafting a deck. So we've got a couple of really sweet archetypes that are very interesting, lots of cool choices to bring you today, and then Ian Duke will be here tomorrow to walk you through another 2 archetype pairs. So we're going to start with black, white, white, black, zombies. So here we go, just the very basics. What are we trying to do?
You're trying to assemble cards with the creature type zombie.
Okay.
With cards that care about the creature type zombie.
That actually, so that's what you mean by tribal synergies.
Yes.
Okay, so just think zombie, 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 zombie. That's a very good place to start. So why don't we take a look at an overall version of the deck. And again, what this is, it's not the best deck you've ever seen of this version. I'll just walk you through it. Some of you won't be familiar with all the cards. Fanbearer, tap a creature. Anoint a Priest, the 1/3. 2 Binding Mummies, 2/2 with the tap trigger. Gustwalker, just a very good card. Wayward Servant, triggers off zombies. Inner Ketra's Name as well. Then we've got 2 Those Who Serve, the 2/4 for 3. Unwavering Initiate 3/2 comes back for 5. Cursed Minotaur has Menace as 3/2. Lord of the Accursed is the Zombie Lord. Trial of Solidarity, another +2/+1 for all your team. Cartouche of Ambition, Splendid Agony, couple of -1 counters. A Ketra's Monument churns out 1/1 warriors. Sparring Mummy, the 3/3. You've got Tarkrop Elite there. Gravedigger brings something back. Cast Out, just a straight good card. And then a Ketra's Attendant and Final Reward you can see there. So that's the deck. But what does that really lead us to? Let's get to the core. What's the real structure of the deck? So Luis, what's going on here?
So here we've pulled out the cards that care about how many zombies you have. You have Lord of the Accursed giving all your zombies +1/+1. Wayward Servant draining your opponent for 1 whenever you play a zombie, and then the 2 Binding Mummies which tap down your opponent's creatures. Once you've gotten that critical mass of zombies, Inner Ketra's Name gives all of them +2/+1, and so does Trial of Solidarity. Though this one doesn't actually care about zombies, it's still representative of the fact this is a kind of go-wide aggro deck.
Right, and also it's worth saying that a lot of games are won when you do go wide by playing Inner Ketra's Name and Trial of Solidarity as a sort of 5-mana split spell almost, if you like. You cast both on the same turn, that you win the game. So if that's the core, where's the support? Let's take a look. So here we go. Fanbearer, it's a zombie and has a rather nice ability. Anoint a Priest, it isn't a zombie, but anytime in Bomb, what do they come back as, Luis?
They come back as zombies.
Correct. Then we've got 4 zombies at the 3 slot, 2 Those Who Serve, 2 Cursed Minotaur, an Unwavering Initiate. In Balm, it comes back. Sparring Mummy is a zombie. Gravedigger is a zombie and gets back, that's right, a zombie. And finally, a Ketra's Attendant, which takes a bit of work, and in some ways you'd actually quite like it never to be a zombie, but it does come back as one. Now, what about the curve? Because the curve is fundamental to how the game plays out. You want to see how each turn is like to progress. Fanbearer, good turn 1?
Fanbearer is one of the better 1-drops in the format because not only does it come out early, it also has relevance throughout the entire course of the game.
Okay, what about 2? Let's take a look. Okay, 5 2-drop creatures, and although Inner Ketra's Name is a 2-drop, you're not actually going to be casting that on turn 2. Would you ever? I don't think you ever would play that on turn 2. All right, what about the 3s? Wow, almost off the screen. Luis, what stands out to you in the 3s?
These decks do have a lot of 3-drops, which means when you look at a curve like this, you should prioritize 2-drops because of how many 3s you're going to end up with regardless of how many 2s you get.
Right, so are you thinking that we're going to play maybe the Fanbearer, but we've only got 1 of those, certainly a 2-drop, certainly a 3-drop, but on turn 4, you would much rather play 2 more 2-drops than 1 3-drop, or indeed a 4-drop?
Right, especially because of cards like Inner Ketra's Name and Trial of Solidarity.
Okay, so if we do go up to 4, we've got Sparring Mummy, Tarkrop Elite. Now, Tarkrop Elite doesn't, on the face of it, it's not a zombie. It doesn't make zombies. So why is that in a typical good white-black zombies list?
Because the zombie deck tends to flood the board a little bit, and Talkrop Lead's just a very powerful card. One of the fun facts about the zombie deck, you are allowed to put non-zombie creatures in your deck.
Okay, so and that I know that you're sort of saying that jokingly, but I think a lot of players do fall into that trap because you just see the Z word and you're away. It's like, I'll take another zombie, I'll take another zombie.
Well, how it kind of works is cards that are zombies you want in your deck, you look at those who serve, you're like, well, this is a zombie, this goes in the zombie deck, and you're correct, it does. Cards that aren't zombies can also kind of bolster the deck. You'd rather have zombies in general, but you're happy to fill out the deck with just good cards like Gustwalker, like Talkrop Elite.
Okay, let's look at 5. There's only a couple of cards here. A Catcher's Attendant and Final Reward. So, if you just come back to us here at the wall, because we want to show you here, let's just map out a sample 1 to 5. So, I'll just kick off with a Fanbearer at 1. On we go to a Binding Mummy at 2. Those who serve on 3, that's going to trigger your Binding Mummy. So, we tap down their 2-drop, and we attack with our Binding Mummy and our Fanbearer. Then turn 4, Sparring Mummy. So that triggers the Binding Mummy again, so that gets rid of their 3-drop. And then turn 5, probably somewhere back around here, maybe a Cursed Minotaur. And of course, Menace, when you're putting them under pressure, really good. Try this, the best. Give me the dream 1 to 5. Fanbearer.
The dream 1 to 5 starts with Fanbearer. In the early game, you'd rather just go Fanbearer into Binding Mummy into Lord of the Accursed. And at that point, you almost won the game already, especially if you're on the play, because you've already attacked with now a 3/3 Binding Mummy and a 2/3 Fanbearer on turn 3, tapping their only blocker unless they had a 1-drop. And then the next turn, almost regardless of what you follow up with, you're going to be able to get in for damage. And if you don't have a zombie, Lord of the Accursed can give your zombies Menace. You might be able to just play one of your removal spells, or you can use one of the pump spells and just, almost finish off your opponent. And we're talking turn 5, turn 6.
Right. Now, again, bear in mind, we've deliberately brought the power level down a little bit. This is not a guaranteed 3-0, all the power cards. Wayward Servant's uncommon. Lord of the Accursed is uncommon. You will frequently, particularly if you do pick up one of these signpost uncommon Wayward Servants, you're much more likely to get more of them later in the draft because you're the black-white drafter.
One of the featured drafters we saw, Li Tian, took a Wayward Servant with 3 cards left in the pack in pack 2. It was clear nobody at the table was drafting this deck.
Right, because there are 10 color pairs, 8 people at the table. That's why you see things like Wayward Servant, and also Weaver of Currents is another card, super late in packs, and you just go, no one's playing green-blue. All right, so there you go. There's a typical example of a black-white zombies deck. Now remember, when you draft, every time you sit down, this is kind of the stretch of cards you're looking to build and get a sense of that curve. 1 is not super important in the zombies deck. Now, some people are going to play Sacred Cat in that slot because it comes back with Embalm as a zombie, but 3 is where the deck mostly lives, and once you hit 5, there's really not much up that end at all. So that's white-black zombies. Let's do another one of these. We're going to keep the black, we're going to transfer to blue. And Luis, blue-black this time around, what's it trying to do?
So blue-black cycling is trying to combine cards like Drakehaven, Horror of the Broken Lands, Heckma Sentinels, these cards that give you payoffs for cycling, with a bunch of cards that have cycling. And through that, you get to kind of churn through your deck, getting these little incremental advantages as you do so.
All right, so why don't we take a look at our overall deck for this archetype. So here we go. Again, I'll walk you through. Ruthless Sniper, when you cycle or discard, you pay 1, and you can put the -1 counter on. Scarab Feast, cycles, exiles up to 3 cards. Seeker of Insight there, Shadowstorm Vizier, the 1/3 flyer that gets bigger. Censor is a counterspell sometimes. Essence Scatter, a hard counterspell. Heckma Sentinels, 2/3, it pumps each time you cycle or discard. Wasteland Scorpion, both cycles and has Death Touch. Drakehaven's the rare we've already seen. Splendid Agony, couple of counters. Unburdened, discard 2. Wandering Death, bring things back. It is both cycling and cyclical. Then we've got Pitiless Vizier, the 4/2, gains indestructible when you cycle or discard. Hieroglyphic Illumination, both cycles and draws cards. Shimmer Scale Drake, big 3/4 flyer, or just a cycler. Horror of the Broken Lands, enormous 4/4, sometimes 6/5, sometimes even 8/6, and a cycler. Final Reward, just like we saw 1 copy in the white-black deck, because everyone who's black wants one of those. And then at the top end, Angler Drake, your 4/4 flyer, River Serpent, Floodwaters, returning 2 cards to hand. And if you're feeling greedy and you've got a nice 7-drop uncommon, Lay Claim. So that's the cards in the deck. Now let's break down what's really going on. So let's look here's the core, Luis, and we've got 2, 4, 6, 7 cards that actually care about doing this cycling.
And Drakehaven is certainly the most important. That by itself is an engine. But even cards like Ruthless Sniper and Shadowstorm Vizier give you a pretty sizable advantage when you cycle in the early or mid game.
Okay, now Drakehaven is clearly a fantastic card and a real signpost. You open it in pack 1. Unless you dislike this archetype, you would just pretty much take that out of a pack 1, right?
I like Drakehaven pick 1, pack 1. There are cards I would take over, but there are not very many.
Okay, but these two uncommons, Ruthless Sniper and Shadowstorm Vizier, unless you are cycling and discarding, neither of these are particularly good. A 1-2 without an ability, a 1-3 flyer without an ability. So those two are going to float round the table to you, the blue-black drafter.
Yeah, one of the ways to get into blue-black is seeing a 5th or 6th pick Shadowstorm Vizier in pack 1. And identifying that other people are just not interested in this color combination or this theme.
So that's how you take that 5 or 6, and that way you avoid seeing the Weaver of Currents equivalent pick 13, like you said, the Wayward Servant thing. So you move in there. So we've got 7 pieces of our core deck that really care about the cycling. So now, where are the cyclers? Let's take a look. Now, we're in an aggressive format here. And boy, are there some expensive cards there. But we'll talk more about that in a bit. Here we go. What stands out to you here, Luis? Because I think the big challenge for the cycling player is working out when are these cards meant to say cycling and when are they meant to be counter-target spell, draw 2 cards, be a 4-4, steal a permanent. What's that balance like?
Scarab Feast, those kind of cards, you're just going to cycle them. You're basically never going to cast Scarab Feast maybe 1 out of 10 times you cast it with some weird interaction. Mm-hmm. Cards like Censor and Hieroglyphic Illumination, you'll cycle them if you can't cast them, but if you could ever censor a spell successfully, you almost always do so. If you have 4 mana, you'd just rather cast the Illumination. And this is typical especially of the 1-mana cyclers. This particular deck has 5 1-mana cyclers plus Scarab Feast, which only cycles.
Yep.
Those cards, you're pretty prone to just cycling them because it's just so cheap to do so. Whereas cards like Wasteland Scorpion, you're a lot more likely to cast because the cycling and cost are so close together.
Right, I think Wasteland Scorpion's a super interesting card because it sits at the point where you would like to cycle it probably, but a lot of the time you feel, particularly because of the aggressive format and they've already got a 3-2 and maybe they've stuck a +1/+1 on it somehow, whatever, you kind of need to get it on the board. So those are our cyclers. Now let's look at the curve and see how things start to pan out. So Ruthless Sniper and Scarab Feast at 1. Here come the 2 drops. And we've got, let's see, at 2, what do we have? There we go, Seeker of Insight and Shadowstorm Vizier, the spells, Censor and Essence Scatter. At 3, here they come. We go on, the 2 Heckma Sentinels and the Wasteland Scorpion. There's our fun rare Drakehaven. And the thing about Drakehaven, we've said that it's a very good card, Luis, but we should really explain why. It's the fact that it is eventually a win condition, but it's the free defense that is so critical for that card.
It makes all your cycling cards into 2/2 Drakes that draw you a card. Scarab Feast becomes 1 in a black, make a 2/2 flying, draw a card. And it's really hard to kill your opponent through that. Once you cycled enough, you end up with still a bunch of cards to play, and you end up on cards and up on board position.
Let's look at the 4 drops then. So there's Pitiless Vizier, the 2 Hieroglyphic Illumination. On to 5 we go. And we'll show you those as well. Shimmer Scale Drake, Horror of the Broken Lands, and there's our big removal spell. And it is worth noting, that is our 1 big removal spell. We've got a little Splendid Agony going on there, but killing things is not what this deck's really doing. And then at 6+, over at the end there, the Drake, the Serpent, Floodwaters, and Lay Claim. Now, come back to me for a moment, if you will, because we've kind of cheated a bit, and this is really important. Curve isn't just about converted mana cost in the top right-hand corner. Curve is about when you do what you do. We saw in the last deck, you're not going to cast Inaketra's Name on turn number 2,
no.
Ever. So, yes, eventually you'll tap 2 lands for it, but you're going to do that on turn 6, 8, whenever
right.
it is. Now, we said, look at all these 4, 5, and 6 drops in an aggressive format. But what if we reorder this where all these cards with their cycling costs, we'll put them in that converted mana cost order. So let's swing them all around, and this is what you end up with. And suddenly now, There's 7 things to do potentially on turn 1, 6, 8, 9 things to do on turn 2, another 4 on turn 3, and suddenly it's like this very lonely little pitiless vizier, a late game removal card, and the I'm just really, really good Angler Drake sitting there. So, Luis, now that we've got this version of the curve up, give me a sense of what a typical opening 4 or 5 turns might look like.
This deck always wants Ruthless Sniper in its opening hand. That's by far the most important card, just because if you play a Ruthless Sniper on turn 1, your opponent's first couple plays, you can just blank them by cycling. They play a 2-1 or even a 2-2, and you're just like, cycle, -1/-1. You get on the board, you set your opponent back. Likewise, Shadowstorm Vizier is the card this deck wants on turn 2 because it plays great defense, then it eventually starts killing your opponent. On 3, Heckma Sentinels is a good defender, but you'd really rather just have the Drakehaven. If this deck draws Drakehaven, it's significantly better than when it doesn't, so it is based around this one particular card more than, say, that last Zombies deck, where a lot of its cards were interchangeable.
Right.
And then from there, you do have these, more expensive cards, but a lot of it is you're going to start to play your cycling cards. You're going to start to cast, the Wander in Death because you traded off some creatures. You're going to eventually get to the point where you're casting Horror of the Broken Lands or River Serpent, and the deck just wants to do that eventually.
And it's also worth noting, again, we deliberately didn't make this the best conceivable version. Missing from this list is Faith of the Devoted. That's the black uncommon that says whenever you cycle or discard, you can pay 1, and if you do, you drain your opponent for 1 life. Now, if you're playing with that in the deck, then the play pattern is all about their end step and just cycling something off for 2 mana. You spend the 3rd mana on the Faith of the Devoted, and back you go to you. Now, what I do want to ask you about, Luis, then, as we look at this deck, it's a great fun deck to play, my lord. You draw cards, you get value, you never run out of things, and you get to be unstoppable. Is it hard to play? My sense is that there's a lot of tricky choices in this.
This is certainly much harder to play than, say, the Black-White Zombies deck, because all of your cards are split cards. You look at these cards and you're like, well, they can have their effect, or you can cycle them and just get a random card instead. What's better? What's the opportunity cost of doing that? When should you cycle to get an extra point of damage through with Heckma Sentinels? There's a lot going on here. It's a very fun deck, but it is a deck that I think you do need some practice with.
All right, well, may you open plenty of Drake Havens to get practice with the blue-black cycling deck, or indeed Black-White Zombies. Now, tomorrow, Ian will be here. If you're thinking, they haven't done my archetype yet, tomorrow we'll be taking a look at Green-Blue Ramp, which is a super interesting archetype with Ian, and we'll also get to play around with -1/-1 counters, because there's some really sweet plays in the green-black -1/-1 counters deck. But for now, that's our first look at the Amonkhet Draft Archetype Blueprints.